and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
Did you have a glorious 4th?
I had a quiet 4th, which made me very happy. And you?
Rather, typical. Just read the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and then watched some fireworks. But in order to give you some good news, we have to go overseas. Germany's parliament voted to open marriage to gay couples.
And we have a lot of other international news, but here at home, the High Court of Texas unanimously ignored the U.S. Supreme Court and ruled that it may be okay to deny equal benefits to same-sex married couples. There are nuances to this.
Yes,
Stay
there
tuned.
Are. Yes, there are. The United States military has now officially delayed admission of transgender people into the service by 6 months.
Trump, you've heard of him. Some people won't say his name, but we have to identify him. Nominated an adversary of civil rights protections to head the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division.
Among other offensive appointments.
Yes.
North Carolina's law allowing magistrates not to perform same-sex marriages has survived a legal challenge.
Chuck Renslow, the Chicago gay pioneer who founded International Mr. Leather and many, many more community institutions, has died at 87.
And China has cracked down on access to LGBT websites.
I'm tempted to start with Larry Kramer's 4th of July message.
Well,
we're cranky.
In the spirit of Frederick Douglass, who in 1854 gave his famous 4th of July speech, here's what Larry Kramer had to say to his gay brothers and sisters.
On Facebook. Happy 4th of July. We have no independence to celebrate. We are not free. We're being murdered again. Almost every post in Trump's cabinet is now held by someone who hates us. This new Supreme Court justice will eat us alive. The recent gay pride marches in Washington were embarrassing. Even the New York Times didn't write about our march of over 2 million people in New York City, the largest gay pride march the city's ever had. Actually, they did in the sports section, but that's a footnote. It's looking like Trump's going to be around a while. He's getting away with anything and everything. He and his government want us dead. We are lined up in front of a firing squad, and we are not all fighting back. Where are we?
Well, that's Larry, is trying to be a catalyst again to get us moving. And I do think about that sometimes. We do go about a lot of things in our daily lives while the republic is crumbling all around us.
Well, let's spend the next almost an hour talking about where we are and what's going on and what we are doing and what we need to do. Well, but we could start with the president because he really has done some horrible things this last week.
Including the fact that his Defense Department did delay by 6 months the implementation of opening service to transgender members. Now, existing transgender members have been allowed to stay, have been given services and things, but the services are all saying we need more time for this before we start admitting people who are transgender from the get-go.
The glass half full version of this is that the Army and the Air Force wanted 2 years delay before allowing new trans recruits. The General Mattis, or Secretary of Defense Mattis, is holding them to 6 months at the moment. I suppose that could always be extended. And there is someone in Congress, a Republican House member, who wanted to submit a bill to discharge all current trans members, let alone any new ones.
And then there's the fact that, and I don't know how they're getting away with this, but the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is, Trump says he favors so much, is not paying for transition-related coverage in their health care plan. And so 9 states and the District of Columbia have filed an amicus brief in a suit supporting trans veterans who are trying to get this care.
And then there's the Justice Department. The Justice Department has a really brilliant civil rights division that has done
sometimes.
Yeah, let me finish the thought. They have done wonderful stuff over the years. Vanita Gupta, who was the previous administrator of the department or the division, we've shown her on the air being so eloquent in support of trans people and their rights.
What I meant to say is in Democratic administrations, because past Republican administrations have done what Trump has done and appointed people who were hostile to civil rights.
I remember Stan Pottinger, who was doing good things in
I remember
Republican administrations.
Ronald Reagan appointed a guy who went before the committee and he had to resign from his all-male country club in order, to take the job, that kind of stuff. I mean, they were not people who had great civil rights records.
All right.
That's all.
Well, the point is, all of that was not as bad as this new
this is true.
version. Eric Dreiband, D-R-E-I-B-A-N-D, is a famous anti-trans, anti-coverage for contraception, because you get a religious exemption, anti-equal pay for women.
Well, what has he done to distinguish himself? He's made a career defending corporations who are fighting off discrimination suits.
Yeah.
So he knows a lot about it.
So he is now going to be running the Civil Rights Division. It's very much like Scott Pruitt at the Environmental Protection Agency going there to destroy any kind of environmental protection. It's like Betsy DeVos destroying public education as the head of the Education Department.
And the Defense Department starting World War III with Korea.
And similarly, the U.S. AID, Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment.
Well, USAID is the U.S. Agency for International Development.
Will now be run by Bethany Kozma, also a bigot and opponent of equal rights.
Just last year, she launched a campaign to oppose the Obama administration's guidance to public schools that said transgender students have the right to use the facilities that line up with their gender. Just last year. So she's been rewarded for this with the heading this Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment.
It's backwards world in the Trump administration.
Bizarro world, as they say, yes.
And just as a small footnote, we've been telling you that we were pleased that the Department of Justice and other departments were going ahead with Pride celebrations run by their LGBTQ employees, and particularly the Justice Department doing one where they were going to honor Gavin Grimm. And they did that, but they closed it to press and kicked out the Washington Blade's Chris Johnson, who has attended these ceremonies for many years.
Well, Gavin Grimm gave a great quote to the Associated Press. He said, "Given that today's administration is largely hostile to LGBT people and especially dangerous to LGBT youth, the gravity of receiving an award from DOJ, Department of Justice itself, specifically the Pride Alliance within it, is not lost on me at all."
Not Gavin. Oh, and Gavin's case is now going to be heard by the Fourth Circuit on September 11th, oral arguments in Virginia. You remember he was bringing his case. We were waiting for the Supreme Court to take it. But then when the Trump administration overturned the transgender guidelines, his case no longer became relevant to the Supreme Court. They had to go back and start again at the Fourth Circuit, so that's what they're going to do in September.
Well, in the private sector, I read that the National Education Association gave their Virginia Uribe Award for Creative Leadership in Human Rights. So they've named it for a big lesbian activist in the school system, to Jim Obergefell. They did that in Boston.
Well, Randy Weingarten runs the NEA.
No, she runs the United Federation of
You're
Teachers.
correct.
Oh, all right.
My mistake.
It's all right. I just saw Randy the other day, and she
so
was in
did
the
I.
Pride Parade.
Yes, I saw her
with
too.
Sharon Kleinbaum, her partner.
And as long as I'm on corrections,
I have some too.
Well, I said we showed footage of a gay men's chorus performing at a Pride event in Knoxville, Tennessee, but neglected to point out that it was the Washington, D.C. gay men's chorus. They were surrounding and singing to some bigots with signs.
And I was so stunned by Justin Trudeau's rainbow socks that I called him Pierre Trudeau last week.
That seems a small problem.
Okay.
Now, before we leave the Trump administration, can we discuss Can we discuss Chris Matthews' compilation of 20 years of Trump interviews? He did this was MSNBC did special shows for the 4th of July, so everybody could have the day off. And he did an hour compilation of his interviews over 20 years with Trump. And I was struck by how much smarter Trump looked 20 years ago.
There was some of that.
And how much he's aged.
There was some of that. There was some of his, typical behaviors and dodges and things like that, and the way he spoke about things.
Always.
But what I was struck by was how Chris Matthews indulged this guy and gave him a lot of credibility as if he was a serious person.
Chris Matthews has been fawning over Tony Perkins for years and a lot of other right-wing people. He has no filter for any of this. Occasionally he gets on his high horse, but he lets a lot get by.
Well, and this is how we got Trump. I mean, he is a media creation.
But it was scary to see, not that we haven't all aged, including particularly me, but Trump has aged in scary ways.
Well, Chris was pressing him on whether, he was going to run for president. He was always asking whether he was going to run for president. He says, with what I've done with women, I could never do it, basically.
Well, okay, fine. Big deal. But to see Trump look together and smart, a monster, but together and smart 20 years ago, and see what a mess he is now physically and mentally is shocking, I thought.
Yes,
shocking.
Especially since he was elected president of the United States.
Exactly. Exactly my point.
At war with North Korea.
All right.
That war never ended, by the way. There was an armistice.
Yeah. Now,
or a ceasefire. Right. So we go to the States?
Okay.
Well, I mean, the most shocking story of the week came out of Texas, although, as Ann said, there are subtleties to this. Unanimously, the Texas Supreme Court, and 8-0, and I should say that they are all elected statewide, so they're always looking over their shoulders at what the electorate is going to think of them.
Can I give a little more background first?
Yes, even more background.
Okay, so two right-wing conservatives in Texas went to the Texas Supreme Court and said, we are Christian heterosexual taxpayers, and we don't think the state should be paying benefits to same-sex married couples because the Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage was unconstitutional.
This is the issue of the day because we're allowed to get married. They have to let us get married, but they're arguing we don't have to give people equal benefits, especially if we don't have anti-discrimination laws.
Well, and these guys wanted to go farther because they're arguing that even the marriages are unconstitutional. But whether that is or not, they want to certainly prevent Texas from giving any kind of benefit to same-sex married couples.
Anywhere, any city.
So the court originally said, we're not taking this case. It's done, forget it. We're abiding by the lower court that said, no, you're wrong, get out of here. And then there was such political pressure in Texas from the governor, from the lieutenant governor, from all the politicians, that the Texas Supreme Court changed its mind and agreed to decide whether this case should go forward.
And they had to really strain to find a legal argument because the Supreme Court of the United States just ruled in the Arkansas case that you've got, as we said in Obergefell, you have to treat these couples equally. There's language in there about that.
So I read the Texas decision, and here's how they manipulated that.
I know.
They said, because the Supreme Court considered the Arkansas arguments about benefits, about the birth certificates, clearly there are unanswered questions here, and so these guys have more of a right to go back to court and make their arguments because their original arguments were, their original thing they brought was before Obergefell was originally announced, and therefore they haven't had their full day in court, and therefore the lower court should hear this.
And by the way, Obergefell was the decision that said all states have to recognize same-sex marriages and allow same-sex couples to get married. But the Texas court also cited a Supreme Court non-decision, just the fact that they granted review to the Colorado Baker case as a basis for its argument in this decision. Now I want to go. All right, so this is awful. Well, they're going to lose. We would assume at the.
We would assume now.
As the court is currently constituted.
Well, I can't quite decide because the LGBT legal organizations and others are, hair on fire reaction to this.
Well,
the Texas court has said.
They raise money, all right.
Yes, it is, and you should be aware of that. The Texas court has said that same-sex couples should not get benefits equal to opposite-sex married couples. And they didn't say that. What they did was crack the door open for this discussion to take place under political pressure.
Now, we told you all about the Arkansas case last week, and stay with us on this because this is very important in terms of how the court's going to unfold in the future. In the Arkansas decision, they said no, you got to give them the adoption benefits together.
And the birth certificate, the names on the birth certificate.
You got to do that, but it was an unsigned opinion. There were 3 dissents, the usual suspects:
Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas.
Yes, but we don't know what Roberts did because it was an unsigned opinion.
Yes.
He could have gone with them but not signed on to their opinion.
He could have just sat on the sidelines.
He could. So we don't know what he did.
We gave him too much credit last week.
That's right.
And a viewer pointed out to us that, in fact, we don't know if he went along with the majority on the unsigned opinion telling Arkansas they had to give equal benefits to same-sex married couples.
We just don't know what he did. We did say on last week's show that he was extremely hostile to the Obergefell decision.
Well, he voted against it.
Well, not just voted against it, but he said this is made up out of whole cloth. There's nothing in the Constitution to give gay couples this right.
So when he didn't sign on to the dissent in the Arkansas case, we thought, oh, well, at least he's approving of Obergefell's settled precedent. But in fact, he was not heard from on this case. So
and this is why we're completely in trouble. I'll watch my words. If Kennedy leaves the court, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or Breyer at this point, or Sotomayor,
or Kagan.
If any of those leave, we are in big trouble. For the rest of our lives, anyway.
Because, was it in the Times I was reading this week about the aggressive nature of Gorsuch's approach, that he's
nasty.
Not waiting to settle in, he's just boom, punching through very fast. And that's what we talked about a lot last week, is how evil and aggressive his approach is, and how he is to the right of most of the rest of the court.
And I have yet to hear from any of his gay friends who defended him publicly and did ads for him on television about how they feel about the direction that he has gone in.
Now, the other thing he did that we talked about last week was making an assumption. We don't know this for sure because there are no names revealed on this, but the court did agree to take the Masterpiece Cake Shop case from Colorado about the Christian baker who didn't want to sell a cake to a male couple. And that lingered for so long on whether or not the court was going to take it that our assumption is that the arrival of Gorsuch finally gave them 4 votes to take the case, which is all they need.
And we still don't know what Kennedy's going to do, but, he did not rule with us in Hobby Lobby, right?
Yeah, I think it's an open question, although if it took them this long to get 4 votes to take this case, one would hope that he's
Well, they could also be waiting for a new justice to come on board.
Well, they could have taken it, though, with they could have had 4 votes. But this became the subject of, I hesitate to say anything like debate or conversation on The View last week because it was so egregiously stupid and obnoxious.
Yes.
That once again.
Well, the baker brought on his lawyer, and then the women were asking questions. But I mean,
bad questions.
I mean, here's what I think it's going to turn on. It's going to turn on. Look, the baker kept saying the word, as you said, the word artistic. This is my artistic expression to emphasize that it's a First Amendment case. The thing
He's
is,
trying to twist it into that.
he sells wedding cakes. I mean, to me, that's a craft. Rather than artistic expression. If they asked him to festoon the cake with intertwined penises or something, I'm just going, off. He could say no. We would agree that he could say no. But if it's just the wedding cake, and I'd like flowers, and this or that, he doesn't have the right to say. I say he doesn't have the right under the anti-discrimination law.
Colorado has an anti-discrimination law that covers sexual orientation.
Just because it's a gay couple.
And that's why he's lost at every level in Colorado.
Does he ask everybody who comes in whether they line up with his religious beliefs in terms of the marriage they're trying to perform?
But what was so disturbing to me was how ignorant these women were, including lawyers on that show, on that panel, who were absolutely unable to understand that there is a non-discrimination law, that it covers sexual orientation, that therefore he was discriminating, and they just gave him a pass and let him sit there and just repeat all this nonsense.
If the court rules with him on this, I think we're in a situation where there are Christians, for instance, who believe that interracial marriage is wrong. Bob Jones University used to forbid interracial dating. So there are Christians who believe this. It's wrong. It's against God's law. Then if an interracial couple comes in, the baker will be able to say, well, I just don't do this because I don't believe in this kind of a marriage. I will not make a cake for you.
The Pandora's box that gets opened is frightening.
Yes.
The other legal story I have here is that Liberty Counsel, the right-wing legal organization, one of our main foes, is suing GuideStar, which is an organization that evaluates charities and nonprofits. And in putting out their latest lists of nonprofits and analyzing them, they labeled some of them, including Liberty Counsel, with the designation that the Southern Poverty Law Center is attached to them, which is that they are hate groups, specifically because of the way they talk about and treat gay people. And Liberty Counsel is suing calling it defamation or libel or something. So GuideStar ultimately removed the label because they were getting so many threats to their staff. Mm-hmm. Because these lovely Christians had been calling and making death threats to their staff, and
well, I mean, when Terrence
it.
McNally wrote a play about a gay Jesus character, basically, a character called Corpus Christi, right here in New York, a theater closed down the production because they were getting death threats from the religious right. Ultimately, they got so much pushback from the artistic community that they opened it. But that was the end of the relationship between the Manhattan Theater Club and Terrence McNally. By the way, another case we haven't commented upon is Olivia de Havilland's suit against the people who do Feud.
Yes.
Now, she's 101, and she says, you had no right to portray me in this. You you defamed me. I don't think so. But
she's a public figure, so presumably they have some license to do that, although as a commercial enterprise, that may play into it. But it was stupid of them not to call her.
Well, why you shouldn't? It is easier to ask forgiveness than get permission. But I mean, if you get into that, you give them the power. Don't you have the right to portray public figures in fictional accounts?
But there are limits of what material you can use and how you can use it. And I don't know enough about the facts of the case. It made me sad.
Yeah. Well, she's 101, and she's asking for a hurry-up on this case. Don't forget, she was Melanie in Gone with the Wind in 1939.
And many other wonderful
yes,
performances.
Many films. Now, the other legal case is North Carolina. In this case, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. They have a law allowing magistrates not to perform same-sex marriages.
Presumably referring those marriages to other people.
And all the appeals court said in this case, we're not ruling on the rights of same-sex couples and other things, but you don't have standing to challenge this. The people who brought the case weren't harmed enough to fight the state's use of taxpayer money to apply the law?
Well, you know, that's similar to the what's the other case we did last week about standing and
There's a lot of
Mississippi
yes.
that the people couldn't challenge because they hadn't been harmed yet. You can decide on the legality of a law or a situation without
yes.
having actual harm of the kind they're trying to impose.
Some other
Yeah,
news
so
from the states?
we heard a terrible story last week of, you know, I don't watch the show Gotham, but one of their main characters or actors is a guy named Donal Logue, and he has a trans daughter.
As Donal on the left
and his daughter Jade, 16 years old on the right. She has been missing for several weeks now, and he has been publicizing her disappearance, and it's quite frightening.
If you see her, call 911.
Yeah. So we just want to help publicize that.
We do.
Yeah.
All right. In the Rhode Island legislature, they passed a bill protecting youth from conversion therapy.
Yeah,
getting on board there.
Yep.
It's on the desk of the governor.
In Utah, in Provo, Utah, they have an annual Freedom Festival with a parade, and they have rejected the participation of a new LGBT community center, which wanted to have a float or a contingent or something in the parade, on the grounds that they are an advocacy group. This is an old charge that by being gay, you are automatically being politically aggressive and pushing an agenda. Yes, the agenda is we are human beings. But the community center actually said, okay, we understand that. I guess we'll just have to get to know our neighbors better in Provo.
Yes. In Florida, a trans teen is suing a Florida school district under Title IX. This is Drew Adams, a 16-year-old teen, transgender boy, who was forced to use restrooms inconsistent with his gender identity. So that's going forward.
A couple of sad cases of murders.
Yes.
In Lynchburg, Virginia, a trans woman, Ebony Morgan, 28 years old, found shot dead. I think she's about the 15th.
That's what the 15th trans person of color this year, who and there is an active investigation, obviously, into the murder, but there was some misgendering that went on at the beginning of the case.
And in Madison, Wisconsin, a domestic violence murder. A 27-year-old man killed his lover, 52, stabbed him at home. There had been previous domestic violence calls. The presumed murderer, alleged murderer, had been described as bipolar, often drunk. The disturbing thing here is that there were these previous incidents, and yet they remained living together, and it ended in a murder.
Are you done with the police blotter?
Yes.
Better news from Wisconsin. A school district there created a position to support LGBTQ youth in the Madison Metropolitan School District in their Welcoming Schools initiative. We should have this in every school in the country.
We want to honor the life of Chuck Renslow.
Yes.
He died last week at 87. He was a giant. He is.
What didn't he do?
Well, he's probably best known for creating the international Mr. Leather empire. He died at 87 years old, but he owned bars, magazines, created contests. He was a very philanthropic donor.
He was very involved in the nascent gay political movement. In other words, in the parties and gaining political power for LGBT people. He used the money that he gained from these enterprises.
He served on the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force Board. He had an amazing empire and was. And
he founded the Prairie State Democratic Club in 1980. And he held some party offices. An amazing, amazing life.
Tracy Baim of Windy City Times wrote an eloquent and lengthy obituary on Chuck. You can go to the Windy City Times website to read that.
But we're going to show you something more personal about him, about the way he lived. But he had many partners over the year, including Phil Andros, Sam Stewart, who was wrote the he wrote a book about, well, he didn't write the book, but a book was written about his many sexual exploits over the years, a very famous character in the community. But he talked about the way he lived with other men. And we're going to run that tape now for about a minute.
It's not unusual in the leather community to have multiple relationships. I had one other lover, then two other lovers. At one time, there were 5 of us living together in the same house. It was home. I was just like anything else, I think. I cooked dinner every night because I was the cook, and if I walked out of the kitchen, they had to do the dishes and clean it. I wouldn't do that part. The most important thing is the trust, because without the trust, there's nothing. And it doesn't start that way. It has to develop. You know, you can't walk up to somebody and say, "Oh, you're cute, I trust you." It just doesn't work that way. But it does develop. And when it does develop, the lasting relationships are long. For instance, Dom and I, 43 years. People would stay with us for a while and then leave and go on. Sometimes we had people sleeping on the couches, but they had nowhere to go. I'm a daddy. Somebody needs someone, come on, yeah, you know, stay at my place for a while. I consider them all family. They considered it also. Just because you're gay don't mean you can't be in a family. You know, you have to make your own division of family, bring your own people into it. And if everybody gets along and it's good camaraderie, it's family.
It's a beautiful sentiment.
Yes, and you know, when he opened Gold Coast, his bar in 1958, it was believed to be the first leather bar in the United States. So it was quite a pioneer in that whole area.
And the country of Colombia has just recently sanctioned a relationship between 3 men and defined them as a family legally for benefits or whatever.
And why not?
Yeah.
They'll be quoting us. In New York City, you know, we believe in evolution, that people can evolve on the issues, but, you know, our mayor, Bill de Blasio, doesn't have much opposition this year. His major Republican rival just dropped out. But there is going to be a Republican candidate. It looks like it's going to be Nicole Maliotakis. She is running and likely to be the candidate. And she says her biggest regret is voting against same-sex marriage in 2011.
In what, the state legislature?
In the state legislature. She's an assemblywoman. And she marched in the Pride Parade. She's voted for some other gay bills. But all right, we might you know, move on from that because she supports
Well, we're still talking to Chuck Schumer.
But she tried to give a reason why she voted against it. And she said, "I thought the bill would have the unintended consequences of lawsuits against religious institutions that did not want to perform the marriages." So I would say not only are you a bigot, Nicole, you're an idiot. There haven't been any such lawsuits anywhere in the country. And that is just bogus. And if you can't think clearly about those issues, I mean, come up with a better reason. Most of them should just admit, you know.
We've heard this reason for many years from many people, and it's always been nonsense. We do believe in freedom of religion in our community and in this country.
Of course.
And the fact that we get charged with that is just insane.
And you remember the guy who sued Grindr because it was being used to by his ex-boyfriend to send literally 1,000 people to his door to have sex with him at his office and at his home, which sounds pretty awful. He sued Grindr, and a judge is going to decide on the case. But Grindr says it can't be blamed because he got mixed up with a tech-savvy, judgment-proof individual. I mean, it was awful for this guy.
Yeah, I don't know what makes him judgment-proof, but he seems to me to be the one who was the bad actor.
But Grindr,
the guy wants to sue.
But he complained to Grindr many times about this happens. You have to do something about this.
Yeah, they could have kicked him off.
The guy kept adopting different identities and found a way to get beyond that technology.
Okay. A little more complex. And ESPN publishes a magazine, and every year they publish a body issue in which they have a lot of athletes in nude but not revealing of genitals pictures. And one of their covers this year is this guy who
Zeke Elliott.
Zeke Elliott is a running back in football.
I also had a women's cover, and it was Danish tennis champion Caroline Wozniacki.
Which, now, Caroline Wozniacki got a lot of positive comments.
We don't have her picture, sorry.
You can look it up. But the men freaking out at the picture of Zeke Elliott on the cover.
Sports, the S stands for sports, not strippers. I don't need to see this before breakfast. What the hell? ESPN is straight garbage now. This is the way men react. The same ones who were drooling over Caroline.
Grow up.
Yes.
All right. Can we move on to international news?
And how about that Susie Orman, though, this week?
Oh, I don't know. What's the story?
Well, she gave an interview and she said, look, stand up for what you want. Own the power to control your destiny. This is the key because I was proud of who I am. I was never discriminated against because I was gay. She had the nerve to say that. I mean, she wasn't always open.
She complained for years about not being able to marry and the unequal benefit situation.
Exactly. I mean, we appreciate the fact that you're open and you're out there, but don't say you were never discriminated against. Come on.
Yeah.
All right. On to Germany.
Okay. So the German parliament has voted for and approved same-sex marriage. Now,
393 to 226.
Now, this came after Chancellor Angela Merkel said, you know what, let's just have a free vote in the parliament, a conscience vote. People can do what they want. I'm still against it. But I think it's okay to vote, especially since I had dinner with this lesbian couple and all their foster children. So I may vote against marriage, but I'm in favor of adoption.
But she gave this interview.
Really?
She gave this interview thinking, well, they'll do this after the September elections. We'll do the conscience vote. But the other parties jumped on it and said, no, we're voting now. So they did vote, and
she voted against it.
She voted against it, but we won the vote. Now, there is, a possible constitutional challenge to this. Why? Because people have gone to court and said, we want to get married under the Constitution, and the constitutional rulings up until this, even though it doesn't mention man-woman marriage, have been, no, you're not entitled to this under the Constitution. But the question is, does the Constitution ban it?
Well, usually those decisions are about the court saying it's really up to the legislature to change it. And in this case, the legislature is changing it.
Well, I don't know the whole history of it.
And that was the New York
I
experience.
thought one of the interesting sidelines to this. Now, by the way, Germany has had civil unions since 2001. That's a long time. And it was interesting to read that all 6 Muslim members of the parliament voted for the bill.
Because they understand discrimination, unlike Susie Orman or Nicole Malik, whatever.
Yes. But Bavaria is apparently upset about this, so they may take some action.
I hesitate. No, I shouldn't say it.
All right.
Let's just say they're a very conservative part of the country.
Yes, they are.
All right. So in the United Kingdom, most of the United Kingdom has same-sex marriage, but not Northern Ireland. And there's been a fight over this for the last few years. And in fact, the legislature in Northern Ireland voted narrowly for same-sex marriage, but it got blocked by the DUP party, which is the one now in league with Prime Minister May in England to
keep her in power
and run the government. So there was a.
And then understand why this is allowed. They allow minority parties or minorities to veto things because it's a very fragile peace over there that they worked out, in the St. Andrews Accords.
All right. So, but meanwhile, pressure has been building for legalization of same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland. Ireland did it last year. The rest of the United Kingdom has it. The Isle of Man has it, for heaven's sakes. So they had a huge pro-same-sex marriage march in Belfast, Northern Ireland this weekend. We have a picture of the crowd that we can show.
We have a picture of the Lord Mayor. Okay,
there's
that's the crowd shot. Big
huge,
rally. Big rally.
Hundreds of thousands of people, including, next picture,
the Lord Mayor there on the right. With a TV star.
Yep.
Liam Neeson has also volunteered to be a leader of this campaign, is putting himself behind it. Liam played Oscar Wilde in a play, and his wife, he and his wife Natasha, former late wife Natasha Richardson, very active in AIDS stuff. So he's in this. They want to get this done.
In other marriage news around the world, in Bermuda, the right wing wants to appeal the court's recent marriage ruling legalizing same-sex marriage, but they may be too late. But they have submitted a request to be able to appeal, even though they're past the deadline. They brought in thousands of petition signatures. We'll see whether the court lets them appeal.
And staunchly Catholic Malta is moving on same-sex marriage rather fast. They have a prime minister now who said Malta wants to keep leading on LGBT issues and civil liberties to serve as a model for the rest of the world. But, and here's how far they've gone. I mean, some of the right-wing opposition there is objecting to, want to retain the terms mother, father, husband, wife. No, we're getting rid of all that, they're saying. So they're really moving. And by the way, they only introduced divorce into Malta in 2011.
Once they get on the train. And staunchly Eastern European Armenia, have I got that right?
Yes.
The Justice Ministry says they don't have same-sex marriage legalization, but they will recognize same-sex marriages performed elsewhere.
Yes.
Both between Armenian citizens and foreign citizens, and foreign couples that have been married elsewhere. They'll recognize their marriages.
This is how we got it in New York. Edie Windsor went to Canada. People went to Massachusetts and Connecticut, and they came back and they were recognized by the state of New York. So that's what's happening in Armenia.
Armenia, of all places. And in France, they now will allow assisted reproduction, artificial insemination, in vitro, whatever, for same-sex couples and single women on an equal basis with heterosexual couples.
And by the way, the German progress has raised hopes in Switzerland for moving on. So in Serbia, the lawmakers there did elect Ana Brnabić. Brnabić, I heard it actually when I went online. That's the way I heard it online. I went and listened to people say it. Whatever. She's the new prime minister. She's openly lesbian. They voted 157 to 55 to approve it.
Yeah, but there's some thought that she's just a stooge for a very right-wing president. So.
And using gay issues to mask, Governor Cuomo does a little bit in New York, to mask some other conservatism.
Pinkwashing.
Yes, you could call it that.
All right. So meanwhile, they held a big World Pride event in Madrid, Spain. They do these periodically. World Pride is going to be here in New York in 2019 in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Revolution. But this year, Madrid, thousands and thousands of people. They had a big conference for a week. They had marches, events, all sorts of things.
They had Shep Wan in there, and he took some other pictures for us. Let's put those up there. Shep sent us a picture of World Pride in the subways. I was wondering what that was, but it's a subway
It's the staircase going down in the subways, and that's what the subways look like in Madrid
And the next picture was of the portisans are in rainbow colors. Why didn't we think of that before? That's a way to go. Well, beautiful.
A lot of creativity in Madrid.
Gilbert Baker didn't know what he was getting into when he... Well, actually, he did. He said this is going to spread everywhere, and it has.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to...
Well, in Singapore, they held the annual Pink Dot rally. Now, the government has tried every year to crack down more and more on it. This year, they said no foreigners allowed, and they set up a perimeter of fences and gates so they could check everybody's IDs. Nonetheless, thousands and thousands of people in Singapore.
Because you said no. And they weren't allowed to accept foreign money to run it, but they haven't been able to put a stop. What will they think of next year?
Outlawing the color pink?
Well, I mean, there's this story from China about how they're trying to crack down. I mean, we have made some progress in China, but they're cracking down on the internet. And
they want all positive stories on the internet, positive stories about the government, no violence, no mention of drugs, no mention of extramarital sex, and no mention of homosexuality.
Well, maybe if we did that here, it would shut Trump down.
I'm just going to sigh.
But a Chinese man did win a forced gay conversion therapy lawsuit over there in China, in central China. He sued a mental hospital over being forced to have conversion therapy.
He'd been sent to the mental hospital by his wife and his relatives, who said, you got to stop having relationships with men.
Yeah.
He didn't want to go. So he has won a formal apology and $735 from the mental hospital.
Right.
That's a good thing. And in Pakistan,
yes,
Pakistan has issued a gender-neutral passport with an X for the gender designation to someone who identifies as non-binary. Here in the United States, that is not allowed.
Well,
we are fighting the State Department on behalf of someone who is asking the exact same thing. But Pakistan is allowing it.
Oregon?
But that's state by state.
Yes.
I'm talking about the federal government. The federal government
Even
of
the
Pakistan.
Obama administration would not do it.
The federal...
In Indonesia, the leader of the second largest Muslim organization has called for a boycott of Starbucks because they're pro-gay. But
they can't get over themselves.
But in East Timor, which was a very oppressed part of Indonesia, I mean, the genocide was committed against them, they held their first LGBT pride parade, and the prime minister there called for acceptance of gay people. I want to read his quote.
Our president would not designate Pride Month as June.
The prime minister there said discrimination, disrespect, and abuse towards people because of their sexual orientation or gender identity does not provide any benefit to our nation. Can you imagine Donald Trump saying something like that?
No.
I cannot.
No, I cannot.
This is East Timor.
I wanted to show you a picture of the Pride celebrations in East Timor, but when I looked around the internet, all I found was the Associated Press story that didn't have any pictures attached, and the images on the Google.
Yes.
I wasn't sure whether they were current or generic.
I mean, it was, I should clarify, it was part of Indonesia, and now it's independent.
Yeah. And in Panama, another national leader, the First Lady of Panama, joined the Pride March there. I would welcome Melania to a Pride March in...
I would welcome her to find out how we feel about her if she marched. This was in Panama. It's Lorena Castillo de Varela. They were shouting, "Lorena, Lorena," as she was up on... She sang also.
She went up on the rally stage. She was quite vocal and assertive about being part of the whole celebration. And frankly, Hillary Clinton, I guess, has marched in Pride parades, but not when she was First Lady.
Yes, she did, I think, because she was running for Senate, and she was First Lady in 2000.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, I went up to her group when she was marching, and I see all these bright young faces, and I said, "How many of you are gay?" And they all start looking at each other. Like, she just put a word out on her volunteer list, and she didn't really get a big gay group around her.
No.
No.
In Turkey, we told you and showed you pictures of people running from tear gas and cops last week.
Yes.
They shut down the Pride Parade for the third time in a row. So the following week, there was an attempt to do a trans march, Pride March, and the cops broke that up too and banned it. And
right. So there are bad parts of the world, and this Trump ban on the Muslim ban also includes a 120-day freeze on refugees of all kinds. So you've got all these gay refugees who Trump expressed such concern for. They're being thrown off buildings by ISIS. It's so disgusting. They can't leave their horrible countries like Iraq
or
and places like that.
They get partway to someplace like Istanbul, where they are in the midst of a very homophobic situation with the current government there.
Right.
Istanbul used to be a much freer place for gay people, but when Erdogan came in 3 years ago and collaborated with Mike Flynn and others of the Trump ilk, suddenly it's a big right-wing shutdown.
Well, Egypt did as well. I mean, there was an much more open gay life in Cairo and other cities before, and now there's a lot of crackdown because of the influence of the religious right.
Do we have anything to say about this Australian cardinal who the Pope is close to, who's been accused of...
Wait a minute. Cardinal George Pell is the finance minister, essentially, of the Vatican. He's the number 3 guy in the Vatican. Pope Francis has kept him on for a long time, or forever, despite the fact that the controversy around his dealings as a priest and as a cardinal back in Australia, protecting predators, has gone on for decades. And so Cardinal Pell has finally been arrested. And he says, I'm going to go back and face these charges,
clear my name.
This defamation of me. Well, this is the guy who's been defaming every single living gay person in the world with the stuff he says about us. He's a big campaigner against gay rights. He's very butch, but apparently he is personally charged with sexual abuse and covering it up for other priests. All right.
So thus our discomfort with the Pope being given a lot of credit for being friendly.
Well, or for wanting to clean up the abuse scandal and keeping this guy in power. In Paraguay, the gay community is, when they marched in their Pride March, they're demanding marriage equality there.
It's spreading.
In Ottawa, there's a request for police officers to ditch their uniforms for the Pride Parade. This is a controversy across the world now around the presence of police. I mean, I think all kinds of things ought to be welcome. I understand certainly the concern about how police treat all communities, including our community. But you know, I wouldn't lump everybody together. What else? Well, let's go on to AIDS.
Let's do. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation, speaking of controversial, of LA, was exonerated in a suit brought by 3 ex-employees. They had charged that the Healthcare Foundation was profiting by testing people and then referring them to care or treatment to parts of their own organization. And the court said, no, they're being perfectly appropriate in that, and no big deal. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation is controversial in other ways, but they're out of it on that suit.
The Gay USA show in New York has scheduled Dmitry Daskalakis, Dr. Dmitry Daskalakis, to come back as a guest. He is
next week
at the health department.
He's the deputy commissioner at the New York City Health Department. He used to be independent and going into bathhouses and doing PrEP info and prevention info. And he got hired by the health department, and he's a top health official in New York City now. And he's just a terrific, smart guy who is going to bring us up to date on the epidemic and other health issues for the gay community. And I'm really looking forward to having him here next week to talk to us.
Next week.
You probably saw that a lot of people were going to the U.S. Senate last week and getting arrested protesting the new, latest bad health care law proposal. A lot of them were from the LGBTQ community, ACT UP members, Housing Works, Rise and Resist, all getting arrested at the U.S. Senate.
And we temporarily stalled the bill. But brace yourself for what they're going to be throwing at us.
Don't count on it being out. There's a lot of work left to do. And I'm going to, again, recommend and maybe show you a clip down the road, Memories of a Penitent Heart, July 31st on PBS. It's a woman who went searching for information about her Uncle Miguel, a Cuban who died of HIV, and it wasn't talked about in the family because her mother, who was his sister, had rejected him. And she turned up his ex-lover after searching for 2 years. He turned out to be a priest currently. And He's got a lot to say. So there are a lot of home movies, documents, new interviews, old stuff. It's a really terrific
July 31st?
movie. Yes, Memories of a Penitent
Where can we see it?
Heart, PBS
Okay.
TV.
Entertainment news?
Yes.
They're going to revive Torch Song Trilogy at Second Stage in New York this fall, and they've got Mercedes Ruehl as the mother and Michael Urie in the Harvey Fierstein role, essentially.
Yes, but the headline of the week in entertainment news is Jay-Z's mother
yes.
coming out.
Yes, life is short and it's time to be free. Love who you love because life isn't guaranteed.
That's Jay-Z, right? Or
Well,
the mother?
the song is Smile.
Yeah.
It features both Jay-Z and his mother
Gloria Carter.
discussing her sexuality. And it's the first time either of them has publicly addressed her sexual identity.
This is his big hit new album, 444, in which he also apologizes to Beyonce for being unfaithful. But the song Smile is this duet with his mother talking about her sexuality. And he's very supportive and evolved.
If you were hoping to hear anything from Edward Albee from Beyond the Grave, forget about it. His will directs that all the things that he was working on be destroyed, and he was working on some plays. So we're not going to see that. But I should say all the money from his art collection, $9 million, is going to go to his foundation. He was always about this, helping young artists and everything, and he's still doing that. By the way, unpublished work, I mean, Tennessee Williams, they keep getting stuff out of the trunk, and it's crap, and they keep producing it and say, oh, Tennessee Williams.
I'm sure that's why Albee, one of the reasons Albee did not want his unfinished work shown. You may have seen television commercials for this new Olympic channel, which is, I'm not sure whether it's going to be on the air or just online, but it is going to be online at olympicchannel.com. And they're doing a 5-part series profiling 5 trans athletes. The series is called Identify. So if you go to olympicchannel.com, you can see the portraits of trans athletes.
Ann and I are both very high on the play A Doll's House Part 2, and only until July 23rd can you see the original cast in their entirety. Laurie Metcalf, Chris Cooper, Condola Rashad, and Jane Howdyshell. Jane is staying on, but after July 23rd, they're bringing in the great Julie White to take the lead, and Stephen McKinley Henderson from Fences and many other plays to play her husband, and Aaron Wilhelmi to play the daughter.
Well, if anyone had any...
Jane Howdyshell staying.
I keep describing it as very funny and as, you know, it's a lot of things, but one thing it is comedy and funny. And Laurie Metcalf proves that, and Julie White proves that even more.
It's smart
and
it's
funny,
a
very smart
which is
play.
a rare combination on Broadway.
Yes.
Let me tell you.
And also smart is our friend Eileen Samuth's bandwidth,
Yes.
which we saw in a one-night-only performance a few months ago at Dixon Place, and it was so good that they are including it in their LGBTQ Hot Festival next week, July 11th. There's still a few tickets left. So
go to dixonplace.org and you can read all about it, and about the whole Hot Festival, actually.
Yes, exactly.
And see Eileen Samuth, co-written by Barbara Raab.
But come back here next week for Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis, and we will see you then. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.